Welcome to Fuller Expectations, the podcast where we dive into topics like aging with confidence, navigating identity shifts, building new healthy habits, rediscovering purpose, health and wellness routines in midlife, and yes, maybe even money, retirement, relationships, and letting go of things that no longer serve you. I'm your host, Carrie Fuller, and I am so excited that you're here with me today. My hope is that our episodes feel like a blend of personal growth, real conversation, and gentle encouragement. We'll keep things honest, thoughtful, and practical. If you have not already, please hit follow so that our podcast can appear in your podcast library. We drop episodes every week, and we don't want you to miss it. And if you thought of somebody who might benefit by what you've heard today, please share this episode with them. And now let's get into today's episode. Hello, Fuller Expectations podcast family. I am so excited to be with you today and talk about the second part of our series around the conversations that shape our lives. Episode 1 in this series launched on January 1st. For those of you who may have missed it and want to go back and listen to that. You don't have to listen to that before hearing this. I mean, what you're going to hear today is going to make sense without listening to that, but that was sort of like the first step. If you listen to episode 1, you know that we talked about something that can feel both relieving and uncomfortable at the same time, if you know what I mean. And that idea is that most stress isn't really necessarily about the situation that we're in itself, but it's more about the conversation that never happened. We may have walked away and not said something that needed to be said, or maybe we said things that we shouldn't have, but this is the next step sort of to that. And once we've become aware of the gap in communication, that means maybe not confronting a situation or having that adult conversation that we needed to have. Once that's sort of recognized, the next natural question becomes, okay, how do I actually say what I need to say? So more specifically, how do I say what I mean without feeling guilty or without getting upset or having concerns about the other person getting upset, and without feeling like you're being too much or being too demanding. If you're like me, I have done this in the past. I've swallowed my words. I've sort of softened what I wanted or needed, and I stayed quiet just to keep the peace. That's something that I have been working on, and people who know me now know that I definitely say what's on my mind. So it's a process, and this is what we're going to talk about today. Let's get into this by talking about why saying what we mean feels so hard. This goes back to when we were growing up, right? We learned from our parents that being honest might upset somebody, so we just bite our tongue, right? We learned that speaking up could create conflict, and we didn't want conflict. So we learned kind of to avoid it. It was the pleasant thing to do, right? And we also learned that asking for what we needed could feel selfish. Like, you don't want to feel selfish. So we instead adapted. We may have hinted around to things or minimized what we wanted just to sort of make the other person happy. That's what we grew up with. That's the understanding when we were raised of being polite and don't upset people and don't create conflict, don't rock the boat. That's just how things were. And so we oftentimes would say things were fine when they weren't. We told ourselves that we were being easygoing when really we were just being silent. And here's the tricky part. Silencing ourselves often earns us praise. People might say, oh, you're so easy, or you're so understanding, or you're not dramatic. But internally, the silence often turns into frustration and resentment and emotional fatigue. We all know what that feels like, right? Because when you don't say what you mean, someone else ends up guessing. And guessing, the problem with that is that it almost never leads to clarity. People's perceptions are different. So what you're feeling, if you don't say it, might be perceived by the other person in a different way. So really, it's not solving a problem. It actually might be creating more of a problem. Guilt is not a signal that you're wrong. Let's talk about guilt. Again, that is not a signal that means that you're wrong. Guilt shows up for a lot of people at the moment they're about to speak honestly. That's when it pops up. And you might think to yourself, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want to seem too needy, or maybe I should just let it go. But, guilt doesn't always mean that you're doing something wrong. Oftentimes it shows up when you're doing something new, when you've been the one to adapt, or you've been the one to stay quiet, or you've been the one who makes it easier for someone else. Speaking clearly can be unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things just feel uncomfortable. And that's totally fine, but recognize that and recognize that you do not have a problem. Guilt is not proof that you're being unkind. It's actually often proof that you're stepping out of an old pattern. That's what it is. If you feel guilty, embrace it, because it's your own internal self telling yourself that you're stepping out of an old pattern. And it doesn't mean that you're being unkind. The other side of guilt is anger. So anger is usually unexpressed honesty. That's what anger is. So many people worry about, if I say something now, it's going to come out wrong, or if I speak up, I'm going to sound angry. And here's an important reframe to that. Anger is often the result of honesty that has been delayed for too long. It got to the point where you didn't express it, and it's waited so long that it turns into anger. So the reframe on that is that when things that you feel are not said, or when needs that you have go unmet, or when boundaries go unexpressed, if you don't communicate those things, emotion builds into pressure. And eventually it leaks out sharper, oftentimes, than what we even intended. So that doesn't mean that you're an angry person. It means that you waited too long to be honest. Clear communication earlier prevents emotional disasters later. So the longer you put something off, the more anger is going to build up. And that's how it turns into something that it did not need to be if you expressed how you felt earlier. So if you're holding anything inside, think about that. The longer you wait, and you probably already know this, we all do. The longer you wait to have that conversation, the more upset you are, and it just comes out different. So one of the most important truths that we're going to talk about is clarity, and the fact that clarity is not cruelty. Clarity is not cruelty. Being clear doesn't mean being harsh. It doesn't mean being demanding. It doesn't mean being unkind. It means being respectful to yourself and to the other person. Vagueness is what creates confusion, and hints create misinterpretation. Silence also creates distance. So clarity actually creates understanding. When you say what you mean, calmly and directly, you give the other person a chance to meet you where you are. And if they can't, that's okay. It's information. It doesn't mean it's a failure. Let's talk about a simple structure that you can come back to anytime that you need to communicate clearly. So this is going to be a framework around saying what you mean. It's not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. Here's the framework. You're basically going to express an emotion around a situation and explain what the impact of that is, and then state your request. So here's a simple framework that you can come back to anytime that you feel like you need to communicate clearly, but you're not really sure how to do that. And this is not about being perfect. It's just about being intentional. And what we want to do is break things down. So you want to say how you feel, talk about that emotion, describe the situation, explain the impact of that situation. For example, I feel overwhelmed when plans change at the last minute because it makes it hard for me to prepare. What I need is more notice when possible. See, it's not an attack, it's clarity. Clarity gives the conversation a chance to be productive instead of painful. We're not saying to the other person that they did something wrong, so there's no need for them to be defensive. We're saying how we feel, we're saying why we feel that way, and we're expressing what we need. So I feel overwhelmed when plans change at the last minute because it makes it hard for me to prepare. Maybe I would want to wear something different. Maybe I wouldn't have wore those shoes if I knew that we were going to be on cobblestone streets. What I need is more notice when possible. This gives conversations a chance to be productive instead of painful. And remember, you don't have to say everything at once. You don't need a big emotional dump. You don't need a perfect speech. And you don't need to justify your feelings endlessly. You don't have to express everything all at once. You can start small by saying, I've been thinking about something. Or, there's something I want to be clearer about. Or, I don't want this to build up, so I'd like to talk about it. Communication is a practice. It's not a performance. So, little steps, having conversations sooner, avoid anger, right? There's a simple framework to lay things out, talk about the way you feel and why and what you need. And if you lay all of those things out, it's not an attack on the other person. It's just being very clear. So just remember, you are allowed to say what you mean without feeling guilty and without it creating anger, either for you or for the other person. Clear communication is not about controlling an outcome. It's about honoring yourself. That's all it is. If you feel things and you never express them, the other person is led to believe something that might not be the case, and it fuels the fire in some situations, and it's just not really necessary. Don't be afraid to say what you mean. Just maybe think about how you want to say it. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel like you're being demanding. You're just being honest. And as long as you use the framework of talking about how you feel when a certain situation arises and why you feel that way and what you need. So just go back to the example of I feel overwhelmed when plans change at the last minute because it's really hard for me to prepare. I just need more notice when possible. That is definitely not an attack. It's just being very clear on how you feel. And you're not trying to control an outcome. You're just honoring how you feel. I am certainly not an expert. I am not a medical professional. I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I just am at a stage in my life where I've read a lot of books and listened to a lot of podcasts that feature experts. And I am sharing that information with you. And I hope that you get something out of it. Thanks for listening today. If this episode sparked something in you, please share it with a friend, leave a comment or a review, and reach out and let me know what resonated. Remember, no matter what age or stage of life you're in, you can pivot. And always remember, the second half of life is not a winding down. It's a waking up. Please follow or subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our podcast family. Let's keep showing up and being the best version of ourselves. Until next time, take care.